In the hushed halls of power, whispers can be more potent than shouts. But what happens when silence itself becomes a weapon or a cage? This is the story of a congressional firebrand, a former First Lady, and a national reckoning with the unspoken truths of power, responsibility, and the perilous cost of staying quiet. Jasmine Crockett never mentioned her by name, yet Melania Trump reportedly erupted behind closed doors. What exactly was said on that stage that hit so hard it silenced the former First Lady? Nobody expected the moment that would shut down a national broadcast for a full 8 seconds. It was a panel discussion on women in power, airing live on C-SPAN from a forum in Kansas City. 5 women, 4 seated politely, 1 ready to stir the pot. Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned forward with both elbows on the table. The moderator had just asked the group, "Do you think public figures, particularly spouses of elected officials, owe the public a consistent example of the values they promote?" There was a pause. Then Jasmine looked up, eyes sharp and steady, and said, "You mean like someone promoting anti-bullying campaigns while married to the biggest online bully in modern politics?" The room dropped 10 degrees. A few nervous chuckles floated from the audience, but Jasmine wasn't joking. Let's stop pretending we don't see it. The Be Best campaign? Cute in theory. But when your husband is tearing people apart on social media, and you're completely silent, what are we really teaching kids? That branding is more important than action. The camera cut to another panelist, whose forced smile looked like she was bracing for impact, then back to Jasmine. And let's talk about engagement. You can't cherry-pick the First Lady role. You can't show up for the Christmas decorations and photo ops, then disappear when things get ugly. If you want the praise, take the pressure. If you want the title, take the responsibility. The moderator tried to cut in, "Congresswoman, we want to keep this." But Jasmine wasn't done. You don't get to disappear when kids are getting separated from their parents. You don't get to wear a jacket that says, "I really don't care, do you?" and then act like the victim when people question your heart. A woman in the second row gasped audibly. A production assistant offstage could be heard whispering something to the director. The screen flickered. The sound cut briefly. For a few seconds, viewers saw a still camera feed with no audio, an emergency move to delay the live broadcast. But the damage, or some would say the truth, had already landed. Within minutes, the clips were being ripped and shared across every platform imaginable. Twitter lit up like a lightning storm. TikTok creators were already remixing the moment with dramatic music, side-by-sides, and hashtags like hashtag #ChCharoMelania and hashtag #CashCrockettClapsBack. In that brief explosion, something raw had been unearthed. It wasn't just a soundbite. It was years of held-back questions finally asked out loud. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just thrown shade. She'd opened the blinds and let the sunlight hit everything. The panel awkwardly resumed. Melania Trump, who hadn't been mentioned by name until that point, suddenly became the quiet center of a national debate. But this wasn't going to blow over quickly because the silence after Jasmine spoke wasn't awkward. It was agreement people had been too scared to voice. By the time the panel ended, Jasmine Crockett had already become a trending topic. At a gas station outside Oklahoma City, a mother of 2 named Kira watched the clip on her phone during a quick break from her second shift. She shook her head, not out of disapproval, but recognition. Finally, she muttered, "Somebody said it." On Instagram, the moment was clipped with bold white captions. "You want the praise, take the pressure." It struck a nerve, not because it was cruel, but because it was precise and timely. In an era when most public figures tiptoe through media appearances like walking on eggshells, Jasmine's words stomped in with steel-toed boots. In the comments, people weren't mincing words. She didn't lie. Melania picked the role when it suited her. This isn't hate, it's accountability. And from one verified account, Crockett didn't come to play church. She came to clear the whole table. But while her supporters gathered fast, so did her critics. Conservative talk show hosts were already framing the moment as an attack on the dignity of a First Lady. Melania's defenders called it cheap politics, claiming that bringing up her jacket or her silence during Trump's presidency was old news. The noise got so loud that Jasmine had to speak again. This time, it was through a video shot in her kitchen. No lighting crew, no makeup, no staff. Just her in a hoodie, talking straight into her phone. I'm seeing a lot of folks telling me I crossed a line. I need y'all to tell me where exactly is that line. Because when I see kids crying in cages and the First Lady disappears, I don't see any line. When women are mocked publicly and she stays silent, I don't see any line. When she reappears to decorate trees, but not to answer for cruelty, who gets to decide when we speak? That video got 2.6 million views in 12 hours. And what was remarkable wasn't just the number, it was who was watching. High school students, young women in their 20s, grandmothers, former staffers from past administrations. Even a few well-known journalists liked the post quietly, but notably. On Facebook, a woman from Nebraska wrote, "I never like talking politics, but this Jasmine woman, she's got me listening." And it wasn't just her tone, it was the clarity, the plain-spoken honesty, the refusal to dress it up with political doublespeak. Jasmine was saying what others were afraid to. That image without action means nothing, that you don't get to represent kindness in public while ignoring cruelty in private. Meanwhile, Melania's camp stayed silent. No statements, no clarifications, just the usual posts about museum visits and flashbacks to White House Christmas decorations. But the silence now felt different, hollow. A few journalists began asking questions. Was Melania aware of the growing backlash? Was she planning to respond? Had she ever been asked directly about the contradictions between her public message and her private choices? The longer the silence lasted, the louder Jasmine's message rang. And while social media raged, Jasmine returned to work unapologetic. Cameras followed her entering her office the next day. A reporter asked, "Would you take anything back?" She paused, glanced over her shoulder, and said, "Take it back? Nah, I just got started." But outside the spotlight, behind one guarded wall in Palm Beach, things weren't nearly as quiet as they seemed. The lights were dim in the east wing of the estate, but the tension inside was electric. Melania Trump sat on a velvet couch in the second parlor of Mar-a-Lago, her phone resting screen down on the glass coffee table in front of her. She hadn't touched it in hours, not since the second round of Crockett's remarks went viral. The silence in the room wasn't peace. It was avoidance. Her longtime advisor, Helena Zavros, sat across from her, flipping through printed transcripts of Crockett's panel appearance and her follow-up video. Helena was rarely nervous, but today, even she seemed unsure. "You need to say something," Helena said carefully. "This is spiraling." Melania didn't look up. "It will pass." "No, Elena replied. This one isn't going away." She hit something real. Melania reached for the remote and muted the TV, which had been cycling between news segments and home renovation shows for most of the day. Her jaw tightened as she leaned back, arms crossed. "She's loud," Melania said quietly, "and rude. She speaks to be seen, not to serve." Helena didn't answer right away. She studied Melania's face, the tension behind the calm. That's not how people are hearing her. She's striking a nerve because she's not wrong. Melania's eyes flashed. "I stayed quiet because it was not my job to fight my husband's battles. That's not how I was raised." Helena raised an eyebrow, but silence was interpreted as agreement. People saw the jacket. They saw your absence when things were falling apart. And now they see someone like Crockett saying everything they've been holding in for years. You can hate her tone, but the content hit hard. A deep exhale. Melania stood, walked to the large window facing the back gardens, and pulled the curtain aside just slightly. Outside, the Florida sky was cloudless, but inside, the air was thick. "I did my best," she said, more to herself than Helena. Helena didn't push further. She just sat still, let the pause grow. Then you can either own the narrative or let her own you with it. But Melania wasn't ready to make a move. She'd never thrived on confrontation. That had always been Donald's role. She preferred presence over volume, gesture over words. But this storm was different. It wasn't about being dragged through politics. It was about being called out by someone who hadn't been in the public eye for half as long, but had already captured the public's attention like a thunderclap. Meanwhile, others in her circle were scrambling. Staffers were fielding media requests. Former allies were distancing themselves. A well-known conservative columnist posted, Crockett said what many have thought for a long time, and she wasn't wrong. The pressure wasn't just national, it was personal. Melania's own cousin in Slovenia had called the family estate earlier that day, asking, "Is everything all right? Why is everyone talking about you again?" In quiet moments, Melania watched the video. Not once, not twice, 3 times. Each time she noticed different things. The way Jasmine's voice didn't shake. The way she didn't seem angry, just tired of the games. The way the audience didn't interrupt her. No groans, no applause, just stillness. It wasn't performance. It was conviction. Still, Melania couldn't bring herself to respond. She feared that anything she said would fan the fire further, that Jasmine would hit back even harder, that admitting anything, even indirectly, would be seen as weakness. So, instead, she retreated again. She canceled her upcoming appearance at a local fundraiser in Clearwater. A scheduled podcast interview was quietly postponed. Even her social media pages went unusually quiet, save for a pre-scheduled post about children's literacy. But silence was no longer an option, because the longer she waited, the louder the story became. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished talking. 2 days later, Jasmine Crockett stood on stage in front of a packed auditorium in Tampa, Florida. It wasn't a political rally. It was a community leadership forum hosted by a local youth initiative. Middle schoolers in the front row, high schoolers in the back, teachers lined the walls. Some didn't even know who she was when the event was first scheduled, but they sure did now. The moment she walked out, the energy shifted. She smiled, waved briefly, then grabbed the mic without ceremony. You ever get tired of pretending something doesn't bother you just because you're told it's not polite to talk about it? A few scattered laughs, some nods. That's what we're told, right? Be quiet, be classy, don't make waves. And you do that for years. You watch things happen, people lie, and you're told, don't take it personally. But I did. She let the pause linger. I was 14 when I watched my mother, a school nurse, get yelled at by a parent who blamed her for enforcing mask rules. My mom didn't raise her voice. She stood there, calm, while this man shouted in front of other students and teachers, and she stayed silent because she thought if she spoke up, she might lose her job. She stepped forward. I remember riding home in that car. She was quiet, hands on the steering wheel shaking just a little. I asked her why she didn't say anything. You know what she said? Because being right doesn't always protect you. You could have heard a pin drop. So years later, when I saw someone in one of the highest positions of visibility, married to the most powerful man in the country, stay silent while women were insulted, while kids were mocked, while cruelty was dressed up as policy, I didn't forget that moment in the car. I didn't forget my mother gripping the wheel. I spoke because silence is expensive. The crowd was frozen, no shuffling, no phones, just eyes locked in. She looked out at the kids in the front row. You don't need to be loud to be brave, but you do need to be honest. And if you've got a platform, even if it's small, you better be using it for more than Christmas trees and designer jackets. Backstage, an organizer wiped his eyes discreetly with his sleeve. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Some people say I attacked the former First Lady, that I went too far. I didn't mention her name once in that panel until others brought it up. But let's be real. If people knew exactly who I was talking about, maybe that says more than they think. Someone clapped in the back, then 2 more. The room rippled with applause. She smiled gently. Accountability isn't an attack, it's a mirror. And if the reflection makes you flinch, maybe it's time to ask why. After the event, Jasmine stayed to shake hands. A young girl named Imani walked up to her with her older sister and said, "I want to be like you, but I'm scared to speak up in class." Jasmine knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "You don't have to shout, but don't ever shrink." That single sentence got posted later that night and was reposted thousands of times before morning. News outlets ran headlines like "Crockett isn't just speaking, she's teaching," and more than a mic drop, the movement after the moment. But what happened next wasn't in a classroom or on a stage. It happened in a newsroom, in a folder labeled "Not Yet Approved," where a young political journalist named Theo Padron uncovered something buried in the archives, something that would change the shape of the conversation completely. Because when the truth starts cracking the surface, more than reputations begin to shift. Theo Padron was only 28, but he had the instincts of someone twice his age. He worked for a mid-tier investigative site out of Fort Lauderdale. Not big enough to scare people, but just big enough to get noticed when the story was right. That's why when he found the internal White House memos, he didn't run to publish immediately. He sat with them, read them 3 times, cross-checked the signatures. Then he made the call to his editor to confirm the risk. What Theo had stumbled on was a draft statement from Melania Trump's office during the height of the 2018 family separation crisis. A statement that was never released. It wasn't vague, it wasn't safe. It was blunt. It criticized the administration's lack of compassion and expressed private disagreement with how children were being detained at the border. But the most telling part? The final line, scrawled in a handwritten note, "Do not send." He will not allow it. The memo had been buried. No official reason, no public mention, just one more lost item in a system built to protect image over integrity. Theo wasn't interested in attacking Melania, but the contradiction between that buried memo and her silence at the time, it mattered. It gave weight to Crockett's comments. It proved this wasn't personal, it was systemic. Women, even the highest places, were being muted, and the silence wasn't always their choice. But when the public never saw the attempt, what else were they supposed to believe? He published his piece at 8:12 a.m. on a Monday. By noon, it had been picked up by 5 national outlets. By 4 p.m., it was the top trending story on Google News. Jasmine Crockett read the article in her office in Dallas. She scrolled down slowly, lips pressed together, pausing on the scanned image of the handwritten note. She whispered. Her aide, Camille, looked up from her desk. "What's that?" She wanted to say something. She just couldn't. Camille walked over, leaned on the doorway. "You gonna say anything about it?" Jasmine sighed. "Yeah, but not what people expect." 2 days later, Jasmine held a press conference on the steps of a community center in Phoenix. "This isn't about Melania Trump anymore," she began. "This is about the structures that keep women, even powerful ones, from speaking freely. This is about a country that teaches young girls to be polite over being real, that lets cruelty pass if it's dressed in pearls." Reporters leaned in. It wasn't the fire they expected, but something heavier, more honest. "I don't celebrate silence," Jasmine continued, "but I do understand it. And that memo? That tells me she was trying to speak. Maybe we should all be asking what stopped her." The moment went viral again, but this time with a twist. Jasmine wasn't backing down. She was stepping up, changing the tone. And people noticed. "She's not just calling people out, she's calling people in," one journalist wrote online. The conversation grew deeper. Women shared stories of being silenced at work, at home, at school. Hashtags turned into fundraisers. Panels turned into workshops. What started as a confrontation had morphed into something bigger, something harder to dismiss. A movement was forming, not just around Crockett, but around the idea that honesty shouldn't come at the cost of opportunity, that silence is sometimes survival, but it should never be permanent. Meanwhile, Melania's team remained publicly quiet, but inside Mar-a-Lago, things were shifting. Advisors began drafting statements, soft ones, measured ones, but Melania refused to approve any of them. If she spoke now, it had to be real, and real wasn't something she could fake under pressure. But just as things seemed to be balancing out, Theo received a second file, one that would make the first memo look tame. Theo Padron didn't mean to find it. The second file had been sitting in an unrelated cache of documents from a former speechwriter's inbox, misfiled probably by accident. But once he opened it, he froze. It was a draft speech dated June 2020, the subject, the Black Lives Matter protests. The speech was never recorded, never delivered. And unlike Melania's usual muted tone, this one pulled no punches. It opened with a line no one had ever imagined coming from the former First Lady. "In times of deep pain, silence is not elegance. It is abandonment." Theo sat back, stared at the screen. The file was marked internal draft, not cleared. In the margins, notes from the communications director. Too strong. Too political. POTUS will object again. At the bottom shelf, recommend delete. He didn't delete it. He ran it. The article dropped on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, everything had shifted again. News anchors were reading the quote aloud. Podcasts dissected every sentence. A Twitter thread analyzing the tone went viral. The same First Lady many had dismissed as passive was now being revealed, piece by piece, as someone whose words had been repeatedly buried. And for Jasmine Crockett, the timing was surreal. She had just finished a speech at Howard University when a staffer leaned over and whispered, "There's a second memo. You're in it." Jasmine blinked. "What do you mean I'm in it?" The staffer handed her the phone. "Right there, paragraph 4. We must also listen to the young voices in Congress calling for justice, not silence them." Representative Crockett's passion speaks to the urgency many of us feel but fear to express. Jasmine sat down, stared at the words. She was watching me, even back then. Her phone rang. It was Theo. "I didn't know you were mentioned until I reread it," he said quickly, "but I thought you should see it yourself." Jasmine wasn't mad. She was quiet, thoughtful. "Thank you for finding this," she said. "This changes everything." And it did. Cable news turned its cameras once again, but this time they weren't framing Crockett as a disruptor. Now she was being credited with sparking something bigger, a re-examination of how the system silences even its most visible women. Commentators who had once called her aggressive were now acknowledging the truth behind her criticism. That maybe it had been less about Melania as a person and more about what Melania had come to represent. Silence, poise, detachment, a symbol of safety in a world asking for courage. Jasmine held a press conference the next day outside a cultural center in Columbus, Ohio. This time, she brought notes. "I want to be clear," she began. "This has never been about dragging someone through the mud. It's been about honesty. And the truth is, some of what I criticized, she may have wanted to fix, but she wasn't allowed." She paused. "And that's even worse, because that means we live in a system where even the most powerful women can't speak their mind without fear. And if she was muzzled, what hope do regular women have? What hope does a school nurse have? A city bus driver? A single mom trying to fight for her kid in court?" Reporters jotted notes furiously. Cameras zoomed in. "So I stand by what I said," Jasmine concluded, "but I also stand with her. Not with her silence, but with her voice, the one we never got to hear." The statement rocked the media. It wasn't a retraction. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was something more complex. It was understanding. People began sharing the speech on social media. Comment sections filled with words like growth, grace, and truth. But while some celebrated the shift, others felt uneasy. Not everyone liked seeing their heroes humanized. Not everyone wanted to imagine Melania Trump as someone who had tried to speak. The lines had blurred, and that made it harder to draw easy conclusions. Still, there was one more chapter waiting to be written, one that would take place far from cameras, in front of a room filled with women who had lived their entire lives waiting to be heard. It was late October when Jasmine Crockett walked into the community auditorium in Akron, Ohio. Not a press event, not a fundraiser. No cameras, just rows of folding chairs, a podium with a half-working mic, and a kind of crowd that doesn't clap for headlines. They clap for truth. This was the annual Women in Service Conference, a local event that had started small decades ago, mostly nurses, school staff, and social workers. The women in the room weren't strangers to silence. They'd lived under it, worked through it, and raised entire families while wrapped in it. When Jasmine took the stage, she didn't wear a blazer, no makeup artist, no teleprompter, just a long sweater, a legal pad, and the kind of calm that comes when you've said what you needed to say and are finally ready to say more. "I'm not going to rehearse everything," she said, looking around the room. "Y'all heard enough of it already." A few chuckles, heads nodded. The air was comfortable but alert. "What I want to talk about tonight," she continued, "is the cost of silence, and how sometimes speaking up doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a target. But staying quiet, that makes you a prisoner." She scanned the crowd slowly. "Y'all know I said some things on that panel, some sharp things. I called out a woman I've never met. And for a moment, I thought that was the end of the story. But then I found out she tried. She wanted to speak. She was told not to." Jasmine looked down at her notes, then set them aside. "And that shook me. because I know what that feels like. I've been in rooms where people told me, let it go, it's not your fight. I've been advised to tone it down, code for, be smaller, quieter, easier to swallow. She stepped away from the podium and stood at the edge of the stage. But here's the thing. If we all stay small, who's going to build anything big? If we all stay quiet, who's going to speak for the next girl who's got something to say but doesn't know how? A woman in the third row wiped a tear under her glasses. I realized something this year, Jasmine said. Melania Trump isn't my enemy. She's a mirror. Not because we're the same, but because our silence speaks different languages, and we've both paid for it. There wasn't applause, not right away, just stillness. Then slowly, hands came together, not a roar, but a rhythm, a kind of respect that doesn't need shouting. Afterward, Jasmine didn't rush out. She stayed, took photos, talked to women, listened to their stories. One woman, a retired teacher named Paulette, took Jasmine's hands in hers and said, I stayed quiet for 32 years. You made me wish I hadn't. Jasmine smiled, then leaned in. It's never too late to speak, and it's never too late to listen. That night, she posted just one sentence on her personal account. Accountability starts with the brave, but it lives in all of us. Thousands shared it, not for likes, but because they felt it. In the weeks that followed, more stories came out, more memos, more quiet truths finally seeing daylight. But something had changed. The fight wasn't petty anymore. It wasn't about one woman calling out another. It was about what happens when silence meets its expiration date. And through it all, Jasmine never apologized for speaking. Instead, she taught the country how to keep speaking with courage, with compassion, and with the kind of fire that doesn't just burn, it lights a path. This unfolding narrative offers several profound lessons. First, Jasmine Crockett's initial remarks, though pointed, cut through political niceties to address a perceived hypocrisy directly. Sometimes, blunt honesty is the only way to spark a necessary conversation. Second, what might appear as indifference can often be a consequence of systemic pressures. Melania Trump's suppressed statements reveal that even individuals in powerful positions can be silenced by external forces or internal calculations of safety. This complicates simple judgments and encourages deeper empathy. Third, true accountability isn't just about pointing fingers. Instead, it's about holding up a mirror to a situation and prompting self-reflection, not just from the target, but from society at large. The discomfort it causes can therefore be a catalyst for change. Furthermore, a single courageous act of speaking out can unearth hidden truths, leading to a broader reevaluation of assumptions and systems. Theo Padrone's investigative journalism, for instance, amplified this ripple effect, transforming a personal critique into a systemic revelation. Likewise, the story demonstrates how a confrontational beginning can evolve into a more nuanced and compassionate dialogue. Jasmine Crockett's shift from critique to empathy, while still upholding the need for honesty, allowed the conversation to mature and resonate with a wider audience. Finally, the narrative highlights that silence, whether chosen or imposed, has consequences. Indeed, it can lead to misinterpretations, reinforce harmful norms, and prevent necessary progress. If this story made you think, if it stirred something in you, even just a little, then speak. Speak for yourself. Speak for someone else. Speak even if your voice shakes. And while you're here, subscribe. We're not done talking yet.